If someone had told Julia Bennett 10 years ago that her biggest heartbreak would become the reason she reclaimed her life, she wouldn't have believed them. Back then, she was a picture of stability married to rising legal star Richard Bennett, mother to 2 boys under 10, and the woman behind every polished event, every glowing press piece, and every late-night strategy session that helped him build the prestigious Bennett and Carrington law firm from the ground up. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. But Julia didn't have her name on the plaque. She didn't take home the checks or stand under the spotlight when new clients came pouring in. She was a wife, the mother, the quiet power behind the empire, and Richard liked it that way. In the beginning, it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like a partnership. She remembered the early days, when they barely had enough to cover rent and she typed up contracts while their son Oliver napped in her lap. When Richard would stay up past midnight going over case files, and she'd refill his coffee and rub the tension out his neck, both of them dreaming of a better future. They got there, but somewhere along the way, he forgot who helped him climb. It started with changes so small they almost went unnoticed. Richard's sudden obsession with image, designer suits, a leased Jaguar, weekly haircuts at a downtown salon that charged more than they paid in groceries. He started talking about client perception and optics. He suggested Julia freshen up her wardrobe, offered to hire her a personal trainer, and recommended she stay out of work dinners. It's more efficient if I go alone. Then came the late nights, the long trials that didn't show up on his calendar. The shift in tone, condescending, sharp, she chalked it up to stress. Until one night, she caught him whispering on the phone in the downstairs bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. His voice, the one she knew better than her own, soft and amused. Of course she doesn't know. She still thinks this is a marriage. Julia didn't confront him right away. She was too shocked, too scared. Instead, she waited, observed, and as the cracks spread wider, the truth rushed in like floodwater. The woman was a junior associate at the firm, 28, fresh out of law school, ambitious. Her name was Camille Foster. Julia knew what was coming. She just didn't expect it to be so brutal. It was a Wednesday. The boys had just come home from school. Julia was folding laundry when a courier knocked on the door with a manila envelope. No return address. No explanation. Inside were divorce papers. Filed. Processed. Cold. There was also a typed letter from Richard's assistant, listing the firm's lawyer and details about a proposed settlement. The last line read, "Per Mr. Bennett's request, you and your children must vacate the marital home within 14 business days." No warning, no conversation, no dignity. The next 2 weeks were a blur of pain and confusion. Oliver cried every night. Caleb, the youngest, refused to eat. Julia tried to hold it together, but she couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Her life had collapsed in silence. No screaming, no dramatic confrontation. Just a hollow kind of abandonment that stung worse than any betrayal. The only communication from Richard came through his lawyer. He never even said goodbye to the boys. He simply disappeared into his new life, one filled with brunches, boat rides, and Camille. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the plumbing clanked in the middle of the night. It was the best she could do with the emergency funds from her old savings account before the joint ones were frozen. Julia went back to waitressing, nights at a 24-hour diner near the interstate, double shifts on weekends. She couldn't afford childcare, so she left dinner in the fridge and locked every window in the apartment when she left for work, praying the boys would be okay until she came back. The exhaustion was physical. Her body ached constantly. But worse than that was a shame. People whispered. Former friends didn't return calls. Even the school PTA meetings became minefields of awkward glances and stifled gossip. But Julia kept going. She had no other choice. A year passed. Then another. She found work at a legal office, not as a lawyer, but as a receptionist. A quiet, tucked-away place downtown that specialized in nonprofit work and pro bono defense. The pay wasn't much, but the people were kind. Especially Linda, a paralegal with fire in her veins who had marched for labor rights in the 90s and didn't take crap from anyone. "You've got a brain, Julia," Linda said one afternoon while they were reorganizing case files. "Why are you answering phones when you should be arguing cases?" Julia laughed, but Linda didn't. She handed Julia a pamphlet for a night program in legal studies. "It's not charity," she added. "It's revenge fuel." The idea simmered. Julia had always loved logic. She used to edit Richard's briefs. She understood structure, argument, persuasion. What if she stopped surviving and started fighting? She enrolled that fall. Night classes, online lectures. She studied during her 10-minute breaks. She did homework between making dinner and bedtime. She fell asleep at the kitchen table more times than she could count. But slowly, she rebuilt herself. The confidence came back first, then the ambition, and with it came opportunity. A professor noticed her, recommended her for a legal apprenticeship. From there, a nonprofit firm offered her a junior associate role. And then came the merger, the one that would change everything. 5 years after Richard threw her out like she was nothing, Julia Bennett was offered a partnership track at a prestigious legal firm with international reach, Kellerman Global. They were acquiring smaller boutique firms, rebranding, streamlining legal services across cities. Julia was brought in to advise on cultural reinvention, a fancy way of saying she had the authority to keep or cut the people they absorbed. The irony didn't hit her until she opened the internal acquisition report one morning over coffee.
One of the firms on the acquisition list, Bennett and Carrington, Richard's firm, the one she built, the one she was erased from. Julia didn't breathe for a moment. Then she smiled. Not the bitter kind, not the vengeful kind, but the kind of smile a woman wears when fate hands her the final word. The acquisition meeting was held at Kellerman Global's downtown branch. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls, modern furniture, espresso machines in every corner, and that cold corporate polish that only came from money and control. Julia walked in wearing a navy suit that hugged her body like armor. Hair pulled back, neutral makeup. No jewelry besides a thin gold chain her son Caleb had given her for Christmas the year he turned 13. She looked every inch the professional, but beneath the calm, her heart pulsed like a war drum. This wasn't just another merger. This was personal. The conference room had 12 chairs. 11 were filled. One was still empty. A man strolled in 5 minutes late. Tan skin, silver at his temples, expensive watch glinting under the lights. Confident, entitled, a little older, a little heavier, but unmistakable. Richard. He didn't even recognize her at first. He took the seat across the table, flipped open a leather portfolio, and began talking to one of the managing partners about expansion strategy. Julia didn't speak. She watched, analyzed, let him finish his opening pitch. He was trying hard to impress, dropping buzzwords like streamlining client acquisition and synergistic brand growth. It was the same arrogant salesman energy he'd had in their living room when he tried to convince her they couldn't afford a third child, right before buying a boat. Finally, the managing partner, Elaine Thorne, gestured across the table. "Richard, this is Julia Bennett. She's leading our integration team for boutique firms." Richard's pen froze in his hand. His eyes snapped up. There was a beat, just one. Recognition flickered, then panic, then disbelief. "Julia," he said, voice cracking. Her smile was razor-sharp. "Good to see you again, Richard. It's been a while." The rest of the room went silent. Elaine, oblivious to the history, kept things moving. "Julia will be conducting evaluations on each department. Staffing, profitability, ethics, compliance. Standard procedure. If your firm's numbers and structure hold, there may be a full partner retention opportunity for you." Julia's gaze didn't waver. Richard swallowed hard. Later that afternoon, in a glass-walled office just off the conference floor, Richard requested a private word. Julia agreed. He shut the door, turned to her, and exhaled like he'd just run a marathon. "Okay. What the hell is this?" he snapped, dropping the corporate tone like a mask. Julia sat calmly at the desk, tapping her pen against her notepad. This is a merger review. You'll be evaluated like every other acquisition. You can't be serious. How did you even? I worked, she said simply. While you played house with your intern, I put myself through law school, built a career, earned my place. He scoffed, hands on his hips. This is some kind of revenge plot. If it were revenge, she said, eyes gleaming, you'd already be gone. He flinched. Silence stretched between them like a pulled thread. He looked older, tired, like life had chipped away at his once perfect facade. Julia, on the other hand, had never felt more powerful. Let me be clear, she continued. Your behavior during our divorce has no bearing on this. I'm not here as your ex-wife. I'm here as the executive reviewing your firm's viability. If you meet our standards, we keep you. If not, well, I'm sure you know what happens next. He stared at her, stunned. Then, in a voice lower than before, he said, You've changed. I had to. The review began the next morning. Julia and her team combed through Bennett and Carrington's books. What they found was not pretty. High client turnover. Inflated invoices. Several harassment complaints swept under the rug. One of them naming Camille Foster, now Richard's fiancée, as the instigator of verbal abuse toward junior associates. Worse, there were questionable tax filings and an offshore account flagged by compliance. It was chaos dressed in a designer suit. Julia didn't smile as she read the report. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about standards, integrity, justice. On the third day, Camille burst into the review office, stilettos clicking like gunshots on the tile. This is ridiculous, she hissed. You shouldn't even be allowed to participate. You're biased. You're his ex-wife. Julia looked up from the case file. Bias would have been terminating your entire department without review. Instead, I'm giving everyone a chance to prove their worth. You're a receptionist who got lucky, Camille sneered. Julia stood slowly. No, she said, voice steady. I'm a partner. And I don't need luck to see this firm is falling apart from the inside. Camille flushed crimson. You're finished, she spat before storming out. But deep down, even she knew it wasn't true. Over the next 2 weeks, Julia made it her mission to do what Richard never could. Actually fix the firm. She interviewed every staff member. Identified hidden talent. Found out who had been buried under bureaucracy and who was just collecting a check. She promoted a brilliant young associate named Priya to litigation lead. Cut bloated positions. Scrapped outdated practices. Streamlined billing. And all the while, Richard watched from the sidelines. He tried to reassert control, but no one listened. Because the staff saw the truth. Julia wasn't there to destroy. She was there to lead. One evening, she stayed late, reviewing one last financial file when a knock came on the office door. It was Richard. He looked hollow. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the arrogance. He stood there with a coffee in his hand. Awkward, hesitant. I brought this, he mumbled. Julia raised an eyebrow. Coffee. He nodded, embarrassed. I figured. Maybe we could talk. She gestured for him to sit. He did, staring down at his hands. I've made mistakes, he said. I know that. I don't expect forgiveness. But you're good at this. Better than I ever was. The staff respects you. Clients are coming back. He paused, then added, I ruined everything. And somehow you rebuilt it. I don't know how to live with that. Julia looked at him. Not with rage or pity, but clarity. You don't have to live with it, she said. You just have to accept it. She handed him an envelope. It was the final decision packet. Inside, a demotion offer. Richard would stay on, but not as a partner. Not as managing director. Just a senior associate, reporting to the new regional lead. Julia, his ex-wife. The woman he'd once called a sentimental distraction. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he nodded and signed. 3 months after the acquisition was finalized, The brass plate outside the front door of what used to be Bennett and Carrington was replaced with sleek silver lettering. Kellerman Legal, Mid-City Division, Regional Director, Julia Bennett. No one celebrated harder than her two sons. Oliver, now 16, had watched his mother work herself raw for years. Late-night shifts, online classes, tears muffled into pillows. And Caleb, now 14, had silently carried the pain of watching his father disappear without a backward glance. When Julia invited them to the office for the first time, they wore dress shirts and grins that couldn't be hidden behind clip-on ties. She showed them her glass-walled corner office, introduced them to her assistant, and even let them sit in the giant leather chairs during a team meeting. "This is so cool," Caleb whispered, eyes wide as he looked at the framed diplomas on her wall. But it wasn't just cool. It was justice. Richard kept his head down. He came to work, did his assignments, and left. The man who once held court at every staff meeting now sat silently, occasionally scribbling notes and avoiding eye contact. He was efficient, professional, and invisible. And Julia didn't humiliate him. She didn't gloat. That would have made her just like him. Instead, she rose with grace, giving feedback, offering guidance, and letting the system speak for itself. But she never forgot. 'Cause some scars don't fade. One Thursday afternoon, as the firm prepared for a quarterly board visit, Julia was approached by Elaine Thorne, the managing partner from Kellerman Global. "Julia," Elaine said warmly, "we're impressed. Your division has the highest retention and the lowest complaint rate of all our new branches." "That's a credit to the team," Julia replied. Elaine smiled. "And to its leader. Which is why we'd like to extend a formal invitation for you to join our National Leadership Council." Julia blinked. That wasn't just a promotion. That was power. Real, influential, system-shifting power. "I'd be honored," she said, steady but glowing inside. The announcement went public the following week. Julia Bennett, National Leadership Council member. Kellerman Global. It made the local legal journals. Few blogs picked it up. Even some of the old socialites who used to gossip about her downfall left awkward emojis under her LinkedIn post. But what truly mattered? Her boys saw it. And so did Richard. One late evening, as Julia was packing up, she found an envelope slid under her door. No name. Just a neat fold and an old firm letterhead. Inside was a handwritten letter. From Richard. "Julia, I don't expect a response. Or forgiveness. But I needed to say this. I spent years believing I was the smartest person in the room. That control made me successful. That love was a distraction. But watching you rebuild this place, watching you lead with strength, kindness, and vision, I realized I never really understood what power looked like. You do. You always did. Sorry. For everything. Richard." She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She just folded the letter and placed it in a drawer next to her old class schedule from law school. A reminder of where she'd been. And how far she'd come. That weekend, Julia took Oliver and Caleb out for dinner at a small Italian place near the lake. They ate too much bread, argued over dessert, and laughed until their cheeks hurt. Midway through, Caleb raised his soda glass and said, "To Mom." Julia smiled. "What about me?" "To the woman who started from scratch," he said proudly, "and ended up bossing the man who kicked her out." They clinked glasses. And somewhere in the background, the waitress asked Julia if she wanted a copy of the receipt for Mrs. Bennett. Julia paused, then smiled. "No," she said. "Make it Director Bennett." A year later, Julia launched an internal mentorship program for women re-entering the legal workforce after personal setbacks. Divorce, abuse, poverty, layoffs. It grew fast, attracting media attention and corporate support. At one conference, she took the stage before a packed auditorium. Her keynote address wasn't just about her story, but about what's possible when society stops underestimating women who've been broken and starts betting on their rebuild. Her final line got a standing ovation. "Some people think success is built in courtrooms. But I found mine on the floors I once cleaned, in the whispers I survived, and in the eyes of the sons who watched me rise." Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.